Chapter 1, Reviving Area. The afternoon had started peacefully enough. I was in the practice yard with Robb and Theon, watching them train with the Master-at-Arms. Arya had been pestering Bran earlier, chasing him around the courtyard with a wooden sword, laughing that wild laugh of hers. I'd smiled at that. She was always so fierce, so full of life. I didn't see exactly what happened. One moment I was watching Robb's footwork, and the next I heard screaming. Not playful screaming, real terror. I ran toward the sound, my heart already pounding. A crowd had gathered near the archery butts. I pushed through, Ghost at my heels, and that's when I saw her. Arya lay on the ground, impossibly still. An arrow, one of the practice arrows, protruded from her chest. Blood spread across her grey dress like a blooming flower. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. Someone was practicing, I heard Theon say behind me, his voice shaken. The arrow went wide, she ran past at the wrong moment. I couldn't hear the rest. The world had narrowed to just her, my sister, my friend, the only one who'd kept my secret. Maester Luwin was already kneeling beside her, his weathered hands checking her pulse at her neck. Father arrived, running from the keep, his face grey with fear. Robb stood frozen, his practice sword still in his hand. Sansa and Bran were being held back by Septa Mordane. "Arya," I whispered, moving forward. That's when Lady Catelyn arrived. She must have been in the keep. She ran to Arya's side, her skirts flying, and fell to her knees. Her hands hovered over the arrow, afraid to touch it, and she let out a sound I'd never heard from her, a mother's anguish. Then she saw me approaching. The world seemed to spin around me. I was dimly aware of the chaos, people shouting, crying, Maester Luwin calling for help to move her. All I could focus on was Arya's still form, the terrible fletching of the arrow in her chest. I pushed through the numbness and shock, moving toward her. My mind became desperately focused. I had to save her. I could save her. But a hand, hard and unyielding, clamped down on my arm. Lady Catelyn, her face transformed by grief and fury. Her eyes, usually cold blue, now blazed with frantic, desperate hatred. She raised her free hand and slapped me hard across the face. The sting was sharp, jolting, snapping me out of my trance. "Stay back, bastard," she shrieked, her voice raw with pain that transcended all reason. "You have no place here. You'll only bring more ruin." Her words poured out a torrent of fury, a lifetime of resentment finally unleashed. I stared at her, my cheek throbbing, but I didn't feel the sting. I only felt the urgency. Life was draining from my sister with every passing second. "She's dying, Lady Catelyn," I pleaded, my voice coming out as a hoarse whisper. "I can help her, I know I can." "You've done enough," she screamed, her eyes fixed on me as if I were something poisonous. "You're a stain on this family, and now you want to befoul her last moments with your dark arts." She knew. Somehow, she knew about what I could do. Maybe she'd heard whispers from the servants about the stable boy. Maybe she'd always suspected there was something unnatural about me. But then Maester Luwin's voice, grave and solemn, cut through her rage. "My lady," he said, his hand still on Arya's neck, fingers pressed to where her pulse should be. "She's stopped breathing. She's gone." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Father's face crumpled. A low, broken sound escaped his lips. I'd never heard him make a sound like that. Lady Catelyn's furious strength left her all at once, and she sagged, her hands falling limp. The world seemed to fade to a silent, desolate grey around us all. But something fierce and burning ignited within me. Gone? No. I'd brought life back from death before. Not complex human life, but simple, quiet life, plants, dead branches, withered leaves. The same life force that animated the trees in the God's Wood was flowing out of Arya's body right now. I could feel it, even from where I stood. I could feel it leaving her, dissipating like smoke. I could bring it back. I knew it with a certainty as cold and sharp as the steel in her chest. I moved again, pulling against Lady Catelyn's weakening grip. I ignored her limp form, ignored the shock and sorrow etched into Father's face. I took one purposeful step toward Arya's body. Lady Catelyn saw my movement. She tried to rise, her hands still shaking with mingled grief and rage. "No," she said weakly. "No, you won't touch her." But before she could reach me, Maester Luwin stood and put a gentle but firm hand on her shoulder. "My lady," he said, his voice calm yet carrying an edge of steel, "let him go." Catelyn stared at him, her eyes wide with bewildered fury. "Are you mad? He'll do some terrible thing, some sorcery. He'll damn her soul." "What is left for him to do, my lady?" the Maester asked, his gaze still fixed on me. There was something in his eyes, not hope exactly, but a desperate willingness to try anything. "She is already gone. What harm can he do to a soul that's already left this world?" He gave me a small nod. Almost imperceptible. A wordless message, **, I don't understand what you are, but I've seen what you can do. Do it now, or never **. I took another step, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to break free. I knelt beside Arya in the dirt and the blood, and gently placed my hands on her chest. One hand rested on the arrow shaft. The other lay flat against her skin, just beside the wound. I closed my eyes and reached for her with everything I had. This wasn't a bargain with life. This was a bargain with death itself. I felt the cold first, the profound, terrible cold of her body. The stillness. The emptiness where warmth and breath and movement should be. There was no pain to heal anymore, no struggling life to guide and mend. There was nothing. I had to create something from nothing. I reached out with my mind, not to her body but to the space where her life had just been. I could still sense it, somehow an echo, a shadow, a fading ember. I imagined her as she was, a tiny, fierce, defiant flame that refused to be put out. I willed that flame to reignite. I poured my own fire into the emptiness. A river of my own life force, flowing out of me and into her. A desperate, loving offering. Everything I had. I felt the arrow first, a cold, foreign shard of wood and metal. I willed the muscles and tissues around it to release their death grip. Then I focused deeper, on the punctured lung, on the torn arteries, on the stilled heart. I commanded the cells to multiply, to knit together, to mend. The pain hit me like a hammer. Deep, profound, burning pain as my own life force drained away in a torrent. It felt like my very soul was being pulled out through my hands. I wanted to scream, to let go, to stop. But I held on. I kept pouring myself into her, into my small, still sister who'd kept my secret, who'd looked at me with wonder instead of fear. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only moments, I felt something. A flicker. The faintest, most impossibly small flicker of warmth. Of life. I focused on that tiny spark, fanning it like a candle flame in the wind, willing it to grow stronger. The heart that had been silent and still now beat once. Weak, uncertain. Then again. And again. A slow, steady rhythm beginning to build. The lungs, which had been collapsed and still, now drew in breath, a painful, rattling, fragile sound, but breath nonetheless. I pulled my hands away and collapsed onto the ground beside her. I was panting, my whole body weak and shivering uncontrollably. Every part of me felt hollow, scraped clean. But a profound, overwhelming relief washed through me. I'd done it. I looked up through blurred vision. The crowd stood frozen in silence, a circle of shocked faces. Lady Catelyn was still as stone, her eyes wide with something beyond horror, beyond understanding. Father stood behind her, his hand on his sword hilt as if he didn't know what else to do with it. Maester Luwin knelt slowly beside Arya. His old, practiced hands moved to her chest, carefully, reverently. He reached out and gently drew the arrow from her chest. I held my breath, waiting for blood to gush forth, for the wound to open. But there was nothing. No spurting blood. No tearing flesh. The skin was scarred, pink and new, but it was sealed shut. Arya let out a soft groan. Her eyes fluttered. Slowly, as if waking from deep sleep, they opened. The same grey eyes, bright and alive. She looked at the faces staring down at her father, Lady Catelyn, Maester Luwin, the gathered household. Then her gaze found mine. A small, weak smile touched her lips. "Jon," she whispered, her voice hoarse and thin. "You came back." I didn't have the strength to answer. I just nodded, and let the darkness at the edges of my vision finally pull me under. When I woke, I was in the Maester's tower. My head felt stuffed with wool, and my body ached like I'd been trampled by horses. Grey afternoon light filtered through the narrow window. Arya was in a clean bed across the room, sleeping peacefully. Her breathing was deep and even. The wound on her chest was just a thin pink line now barely visible above the neckline of her clean shift. Father stood by the window, his back to the room, staring out at the courtyard. His posture was rigid, stunned. Lady Catelyn sat on a wooden stool, her face pale as milk, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. I was slumped in a chair, still weak, my head swimming. Maester Luwin was the only one who seemed composed, though even his hands trembled slightly as he prepared a cup of herbal tea and pressed it into my hands. "Drink," he said quietly. I drank. The tea was bitter and hot. It helped a little. The silence stretched on, heavy as a shroud. Finally, Father spoke without turning around. "Tell me," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Explain this." "All of it." Maester Luwin turned from his work table. He looked at Father, then at Lady Catelyn, then at me. His weathered face was grave. "I cannot explain it in the manner of a healer, my lord," he said slowly. The girl was dead. Her heart had stopped. Her lungs had collapsed. The arrow, the damage was mortal by any measure known to medicine. Yet now she sleeps soundly. The wound is healed, sealed as if it happened weeks ago, not hours. He looked at me. His gaze held fear and wonder in equal measure, mixed with an insatiable curiosity that I recognized from all his years of study and learning. "The boy brought her back," he said simply. "He reversed the physical process of death itself." Lady Catelyn let out a soft, choked gasp. "It's sorcery," she whispered. "Black magic. He's a demon. He's cursed." "No, my lady," Maester Luwin said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "I do not believe it is dark sorcery, or even blood magic." He turned to me fully. "Jon," he said gently. "Will you tell them how you came by this power?" "I don't know how I got it," I said quietly. My voice sounded rough, unused. "I've always had it, I think. Or, it grew with me. I don't remember a time before I could feel living things around me." Father finally turned from the window. His grey eyes so like Arya's, so like Rob's fixed on me with an intensity I'd never seen before. "Go on," he said. So I told them everything. Chapter 2, A-Train? "Is that you?" A month had passed since I brought Arya back from death. A month since the world learned what I could do. A month of whispers, stares, and fear barely concealed behind polite faces. I spent most of that time alone in the God's Wood. While my siblings trained with swords in the practice yard, I trained here learning to master my powers here in God's Wood. Today, like most days, I sat cross-legged on the mossy ground near the black pool at the Godswood's center. Ghost lay beside me, his massive white form radiating warmth. He'd grown even larger this past month, nearly the size of a small horse now. His red eyes watched me with an intelligence that still unnerved the servants. I reached out and placed my hand on his head, scratching behind his ear. "Ready, boy?" He huffed softly, understanding. I closed my eyes and let my consciousness drift. It was easier now, after weeks of practice. I felt the familiar pull, like slipping into warm water, and suddenly I was seeing through Ghost's eyes. Feeling through his body. His senses were sharper than mine. I could smell the damp earth, hear the flutter of birds in distant trees, feel the subtle vibrations of life all around us. But maintaining the connection was still difficult. My consciousness would slip, pulled back to my own body like a rope stretched too tight. That's why I'd started training in the lake. Still warging into Ghost, I directed him to stand and walk toward the black pool. The water was cold and dark, fed by underground springs. Most people avoided it. They said it was sacred, touched by the old gods. I made Ghost wade in until the water reached his chest, then deeper, until his paws no longer touched bottom and he had to swim. The cold water shocked through our shared senses, but I held on to the connection, forcing myself to stay present in Ghost's mind. Then I directed him to dive. The world went dark and silent as we plunged beneath the surface. No sounds except the muffled thunder of Ghost's heartbeat. No distractions. Just the cold, the dark, and the thin thread of consciousness connecting us. This was where I practiced. Underwater, in the sensory deprivation of the deep pool, I could focus entirely on the link between Ghost and myself. I could feel it more clearly. I held the connection for as long as Ghost's lungs would allow, then released him. He surfaced with a splash, paddling back to shore and shaking water from his fur. I opened my eyes in my own body, gasping slightly. The connection broke cleanly this time. No jarring snap, no disorientation. Progress. I could now warg into Ghost whenever I wanted, hold the connection for minutes at a time, and separate cleanly. It had taken a month of daily practice, but I'd finally mastered the basic skill. Now it was time to try something harder. Dash. I stood and walked to the weirwood tree at the center of the grove. The heart tree. The face carved into its trunk solemn, ancient, seemed to watch me with those bleeding eyes. I placed both hands on the trunk and reached out with my other power. Immediately, I felt the tree's life force vast, ancient, powerful. I focused deeper, letting my awareness sink into the tree's structure. Past the bark, past the wood, down to core of weirwood. And there it was. A second circulatory system, made from unknown type of cells. Just like animals had veins carrying blood, the weirwood had a network of channels carrying pure magical energy. I could feel it flowing through the tree like luminous sap. There were nodes throughout the trunk and branches, pulsing points where the energy concentrated before flowing onward. It was beautiful. Elegant. A biological system designed to channel magic. My heart raced. I finally knew how magic worked in living things, not as some external force, but as an integrated system, as natural as breathing. If I could replicate this. I looked down at the ground and spotted a black feather, probably from one of the ravens that nested in the upper branches. I picked it up, studying it carefully. Then I walked to a nearby tree and broke off several small branches, still green and alive. I carried the biomass back to my spot by the pool and sat down, arranging the branches in a pile before me. Ghost watched curiously as I placed my hands on the branches and closed my eyes. I reached out with my power, and start reshaping it. The branches began to shift and flow like clay, their structure breaking down and reforming. I pulled carbon, hydrogen, shaped proteins, and cells with careful precision. I used the feather as a guide, copying the structure of DNA. Normally it would be impossible to processing all the data, but somehow I know it instinctively. Sigh, broken logic of fantasy world. It took intense concentration. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I worked, guiding the transformation with my will. Slowly, impossibly, a shape began to form in my hands. Bones first hollow and light. Then muscles, tendons, organs. A tiny heart. Lungs. A brain, small but perfectly structured. Black feathers sprouted from newly formed skin. A sharp beak took shape. In just a few moments, a living raven sat in my hands. It blinked at me with dark, intelligent eyes. Its chest rose and fell with breath. A heart beat inside its tiny body, a heart I had created from nothing but wood and wool. Caw! The raven cawed softly, tilting its head. But it wasn't enough. I wanted to see if I could give it the same magical system I'd seen in the weirwood. First, I reached into the raven's nervous system and turned off all its pain receptors. I didn't want it to suffer during what came next. Then I began the real work. Using the weirwood as my template, I tried to create a secondary circulatory system inside the raven. I visualized magical channels running alongside its blood vessels, nodes of concentrated energy at key points in its body. I poured my will into the bird, shaping, forming. The raven began to shake violently. Its eyes rolled back, showing white. Its wings spasmed. Then it went still. Dead. I cursed under my breath. The life force I'd so carefully created had simply stopped. But I didn't give up. I placed my hands on the small corpse and reached out again, pouring life back into it, restarting its heart, rekindling the spark. The raven gasped back to life, chest heaving. I tried again. Different configuration of the nodes. Different flow pattern for the energy. The raven died again. I brought it back. Again. And again. Days blurred together. I lost track of how many times I killed and revived that poor bird, each attempt teaching me something new about how magic and biology interacted. Ghost stayed by my side the entire time, a silent witness to my obsessive experimentation. The servants brought me food that I barely touched. Arya came once, concerned, but I sent her away with a distracted wave. Finally, on the fourth day, I understood my mistake. Plants needed a separate magical circulatory system because they were stationary. The magic had to flow through specialized channels. But animals were different. Animals already had blood pumping through every part of their bodies. The magic didn't need separate channels. It could flow through the blood itself. I tried again, this time creating a single powerful node at the raven's heart, a magical core that would infuse energy directly into the bloodstream. From there, the blood would carry the magic throughout the entire body naturally. This time, when I finished, the raven didn't shake or convulse. It simply sat in my hands, breathing normally. But now I could sense a faint hum of power emanating from its small body. I waited, watching carefully for any sign of distress. The raven preened its feathers, looking perfectly healthy. Relief flooded through me. I'd done it. I'd created a creature with an integrated magical system. Now to test if it actually worked. I reached out with my mind and slipped into the raven's consciousness. Warging into a bird was different from ghost, lighter, faster, more fragile. I felt the air currents against my feathers, the powerful urge to take flight. And I felt the magic. A warm pulse at the center of the raven's chest, energy flowing through tiny veins with each heartbeat. I focused on that energy, trying to direct it the way I directed my biokinesis. It resisted at first, slippery and unfamiliar. But I persisted, imagining the energy flowing into the raven's wings. After a few moments of concentration, I felt mana inside body of raven moving. I released the warg connection and pulled back into my own body, breathing hard. The raven remained perched on my hand for a moment, then suddenly launched itself into the air. It didn't just fly, it shot upward like an arrow, impossibly fast. It banked sharply between two trees, and I watched in amazement as it didn't dodge around a trunk but flew straight through a thin branch, punching a clean hole through the wood as if it were paper. What the? How? I find out that raven was using the magic instinctively. Strengthening its body, enhancing its movements. The magical node I'd created was working exactly as intended, and the bird's simple consciousness was using it naturally, without thinking, the same way it used its wings to fly, and probably most effective way to use magic. Maybe I can name it a train. I can imaging it flying through rows of enemy army. I stared at my own hands, excitement building in my chest. If a raven could do it instinctively. I closed my eyes and reached inward, trying to sense my own magical system. I knew I had something similar. It was how I used my biokinesis, how I warged. But could I use it the way the raven did? Could I strengthen my own body with raw magical energy? I focused on my arm, trying to push power into my muscles the way I'd pushed it into the raven's wings. Nothing happened. I tried harder, straining, visualizing the energy flowing. Still nothing. Frustration burned in my chest. The raven could do it without thinking, but I couldn't seem to make it work in my own body. Maybe human consciousness was too complex, too self-aware. Maybe I was overthinking it. I would need more time. More practice. But before I could try again, I heard footsteps crunching on fallen leaves. I opened my eyes to see Lord Eddard Stark walking into the clearing. His face was grave, more serious than I'd ever seen it. Ghost immediately stood and moved to my side, protective. "Jon," Father said quietly. "We need to talk." Something in his tone made my stomach clench. This wasn't about my experiments or my powers. "What's happened, my lord?" I asked, standing. Father's grey eyes met mine, heavy with burden. "Jonaran is dead. The hand of the king. Father's foster father and oldest friend." I'd never met the man, but I knew how much he meant to Father. "I'm sorry," I said. He nodded stiffly, then took a deep breath. "A raven came from King's Landing this morning. From King Robert himself, not through the usual channels." He paused, as if the next words were difficult to speak. "The king wants you to come to King's Landing. He wants you to bring Jonaran back. Like you did with Arya." The words hung in the air between us. "Bring him back? How long has he been dead?" I asked quietly. 6 days, Father said. "They've kept the body in the September of Baelor, preserved as well as they can." "But Jon." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "The king is desperate. And when a king becomes desperate, dangerous things happen. We have to go. Both of us." I looked down at Ghost, then at the raven now perched in a nearby tree. 6 days. A body dead for 6 days would be decomposing, breaking down. It would be harder than Arya, much harder. But maybe not impossible. "When do we leave?" I asked. Father's expression showed grim approval at my lack of hesitation. "Tomorrow morning. We'll take ship from White Harbor. It's faster than riding, and more private. The king has requested that we keep this quiet." Of course. A boy who could raise the dead would cause panic, religious fervor, and a dozen other problems. Better to move quickly and quietly. I nodded slowly. "I'll be ready." Father looked like he wanted to say something else, perhaps warn me, or apologize for the burden being placed on my shoulders. But instead, he simply gripped my shoulder briefly, then turned and walked back toward the castle. Chapter 3, King's Landing. There was no fanfare, no grand farewell, just Father, 5 trusted good and me standing at the gates while the household gathered in quiet groups to watch us go. Father had decided we'd travel by sea. It was a practical choice. Winterfell was too far from King's Landing for a quick ride, and he wanted to keep me and Ghost out of sight as long as possible. A decree from the king was one thing, but Father knew the faith and the citadel had eyes and ears scattered throughout the 7 kingdoms. The less attention we drew on the road, the better. The ride to White Harbor took 3 days. Ghost loped alongside my horse, drawing stares from every village we passed through. He'd grown even more since I'd enhanced him. Lord Wyman Manderley met us at the docks personally. He was as large as the stories said. But when he saw Ghost, his smile faltered for just a moment. "Lord Stark," he greeted Father with a formal bow, then turned to me. "And the young, Lord. He hesitated on the title, uncertain of my status. The Sea Dragon is ready to sail at your command. The flagship of the Manderley fleet was impressive, a massive vessel with 3 masts and room for 100 men. The sailors watched nervously as Ghost padded up the gangplank beside me, his massive frame making the ship seem smaller. Lord Manderley pulled Father aside before we boarded. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I saw the grave look the old lord gave me, then Ghost. He asked no questions. He simply nodded, gave me one more long, measuring look, and walked away. That silence, that trust, spoke volumes about House Manderley's loyalty to the Starks. The voyage south was long and tense. It will take around 16 days. I spent most of my time on deck with Ghost, avoiding the cramped quarters below. The sailors whispering among themselves when they thought I couldn't hear. I caught fragments: old gods, ancient magic, white demon wolf. Ghost seemed to sense their fear and moved with deliberate stillness, never showing aggression but radiating an undeniable presence. Father and I talked during those long days at sea. Real conversations, not the awkward exchanges we'd had at Winterfell when I was just the bastard son he didn't know what to do with. He wanted to understand my power. Not to control it or fear it, but to truly comprehend what I could do. So I showed him. I found a withered flower on the deck, probably dropped by a sailor who'd bought it at White Harbor. I held it in my palm and reached out with my power, guiding the cells back to life, restoring color and structure. Father watched in silence as the dead flower bloomed, fresh and vibrant. The weirwoods, I explained quietly. They have a system inside them like veins, but for magic instead of blood. Nodes and channels that carry energy throughout the tree. I can sense it, map it, even replicate it in other living things. Can create life. Father said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Given enough biomass, wood, plants, organic material, I can shape it into living creatures. I made a raven from tree branches in the god's wood. It's not just reshaping existing life. It's building something new from raw material. Father's grey eyes searched my face. That's not the power of the first men. No, I agreed. The faith will want you dead, he said finally. The Citadel will want to study you, which amounts to the same thing. And every ambitious lord in Westeros will either want to use you or eliminate you as a threat. I know. That's why you asked for legitimization instead of lands or titles. You're planning to leave? I nodded. SOS. I'll be safer there, away from the politics of Westeros. And I can build something, gather resources, train, prepare. Prepare for what? I looked at him steadily. Winter is coming, Father. You say those words, but I don't think anyone truly understands what they mean. Not yet. But they will. We also talked about what I'd learned from Father, the letters, the ones he'd received before we left. The High Septon had written, expressing deep concern about rumors of unnatural powers in the north. The Grand Maester had sent a polite inquiry about examining these alleged abilities for the betterment of the realm. Both letters had the same underlying message: come to King's Landing, and bring the boy. As we sailed past Dragonstone, I felt something change. The air grew warmer, thicker. The clean smell of the northern sea gave way to salt, and as we get near King's Landing, shit. King's Landing was a sprawling, chaotic mass of buildings crowned by the Red Keep. The fortress of red stone loomed over everything like a predator watching its prey. Ghost moved to the rail beside me, his red eyes fixed on the city. A low growl rumbled in his chest, and I felt his unease through our bond. I know, boy, I murmured, scratching behind his ear. We're not in the north anymore. Father joined us at the rail, his expression grim. Stay close to me in the city. Don't trust anyone, not even those who seem friendly. Everyone here plays the game, whether they know it or not. The Sea Dragon glided into the harbor, and I took a deep breath. It took us around. Whatever came next, I was ready. Or at least, I hoped I was. The harbor was chaos. Ghost pressed close to my side, and the crowd parted around us like water around a stone. People stared, some in fear, others in wonder. Whispers followed us. Is that a wolf? Gods preserve us, look at the size of it. White as snow, red eyes like blood. But all of that faded when I saw who was waiting for us on the dock. King Robert Baratheon stood there, not on a throne, not surrounded by guards and courtiers, but right there on the wooden planks like a common man. He was massive. His face was unshaven, his eyes bloodshot and red-rimmed. He looked less like a king and more like a grieving bear. "Ned," he roared when he saw father, striding forward and grabbing him in an embrace that looked bone-crushing. "By the gods, you came! It feels like a lifetime since I last saw you." Then his eyes fell on me. And on Ghost. The entire dock went silent. Ghost stood taller than a warhorse, his white fur gleaming, his red eyes fixed on the king. Robert stared, his mouth slightly open. "And this is the boy," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "The one with the gift." He looked at Ghost, shaking his head. "The raven spoke of the wolf, but I thought it was exaggeration." "By the gods, boy, what have you done to it?" Before I could answer, Robert grabbed my arm, not roughly, but with urgent desperation. "Come! Both of you! We have no time for pleasantries." He led us through the city at a pace that left the royal guards scrambling to keep up. He didn't take us to the Red Keep. Instead, he led us straight to the Great September of Baelor. The massive seven-sided temple dominated the skyline, its crystal domes catching the afternoon sun. Inside, the silence was profound, a stark contrast to the chaos of the streets. Jonaran lay on a marble dais in the center of the September, surrounded by 7 white candles. He looked peaceful in death, but also wrong. His skin was a waxy yellow, his body too thin, too still. His wife Lisa tried to take his body back to the Vale, Robert said, his voice rough with anger. Claimed he was her husband, as if that gave her the right. I told her he was the hand of the king, and he would stay until I willed it otherwise. She's been screaming at me for days, but I will not let her have him. He turned to me, and I saw naked desperation in his eyes, a king reduced to a man begging for a miracle. "I saw a red priest once," Robert continued. "A man of the Lord of Light. He brought a man back from death. It was a terrible thing. The man was hollow, empty, not truly alive. But it showed me that death is not always the end." His gaze bore into mine. "They say you can mend what is broken. Can you mend him?" I looked at the body on the dais. 20 days dead. The decay had already begun. I could sense it even from here. The cells breaking down, the structure collapsing. This would be harder than Arya. Much harder. But not impossible. "I need wood, Your Grace," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Green wood. Living wood. A lot of it. The body has lost too much. I'll need raw material to rebuild it." Robert stared at me for a moment, processing. Then understanding dawned, and he spun to face the horrified septons and guards. "Bring me all the green wood you can find," he bellowed. "From the royal gardens. From the god's wood of the Red Keep. Strip every tree if you have to. Bring it now." The septons looked scandalized, but they scrambled to obey. No one refused a direct command from the king, no matter how strange. Within minutes, servants began arriving with armfuls of freshly cut branches, green leaves still attached. They piled it beside the dais, enough wood to build a small house. I knelt beside Jonaran's body and placed one hand on his chest. The other, I rested on the pile of green wood. Father stood behind me, silent but present. Ghost sat at my side. I closed my eyes and reached out with my power. The wood came first. I felt the life still lingering in the cut branches, sap flowing, cells alive but dying. I drew that life out, extracting water, nutrients, proteins, sugars. I broke down the plant matter at the cellular level and guided it toward Jonaran's body. The biomass flowed like liquid through my hands, pouring into the corpse. I directed it carefully, rebuilding what death had taken. Muscles filled out, growing dense and strong. Organs that had begun to decay were reconstructed, cell by cell. Skin regained its color and elasticity. It took hours. Sweat poured down my face. My hands trembled with the effort. But I kept working, meticulously rebuilding a body that could sustain life. When the physical vessel was ready, when Jonaran looked like a sleeping man instead of a corpse, I moved to the final step. I placed both hands over his heart and reached deep within myself. This was the dangerous part. The part that had nearly killed me when I brought Arya back. I poured my life force into the emptiness where Jonaran's should be. A torrent of pure energy, flowing from my core through my hands and into his still chest. I felt the familiar, terrible drain, like something vital being pulled out of me. His heart stuttered. Stopped. Beat once. Twice. His lungs expanded, drawing breath. I pulled my hands away and collapsed backward, caught by father before I hit the floor. My vision swam, and my whole body felt hollow, scraped clean. But on the dais, Jonaran's chest rose and fell with steady breath. His eyes fluttered open. The September erupted in gasps and shouts. Septons fell to their knees, some praying, others making signs against evil. The guards backed away, eyes wide with terror and awe. King Robert stood frozen, tears streaming down his face. Jonaran sat up slowly, blinking in the candlelight. He looked at his hands, touched his chest, confusion written across his face. "Robert," he croaked, his voice rough from disuse. "Ned? What happened?" "It worked. I thought, as I saw Jonaran, don't remembering what happened." "You were dead, Jon," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "Dead for 6 days. And this boy," he gestured at me, "still supported by father, brought you back." Jonaran's gaze found mine. I'd been careful when I rebuilt his mind. Precise. I'd erased the last 6 months, the investigation, the discoveries, the dangerous knowledge that had led to his death. Those memories weren't gone forever. They were dormant, locked away, waiting to resurface. But not yet. Not until father was safely back in the north. "I don't know you, boy," Jonaran said, frowning. "But it seems I owe you my life." The king helped Jonaran to his feet, and the old man stood shakily, testing his limbs like a newborn learning to walk. He was alive. Whole. Restored. And the game had just become infinitely more complicated. Chapter 4, The Feast. Robert didn't waste time. Within hours, he'd declared a feast, not a small, private affair, but a grand celebration that would fill the throne room of the Red Keep. "The whole city will know of this miracle," he roared, already 3 cups of wine deep despite the early hour. "A feast for the 2 Jons. For the hand who returned from death, and for the boy who brought him back." Father tried to dissuade him quietly, privately, but Robert wouldn't hear it. His grief had turned into manic joy, and nothing would stop him. So that evening, I found myself seated at the high table in the throne room, surrounded by the most powerful lords and ladies in Westeros. I sat between father and an empty chair that had been reserved for Jonaran, who was still too weak to attend. The lords and ladies stared at me. Some tried to hide it, sneaking glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Others were more blatant, studying me like I was some exotic creature on display. I heard the whispers even over the noise. "That's him, the one who raised Lord Arryn. They say he can heal any wound, bring back the dead. Unnatural, if you ask me. Against the will of the 7. The wolf, did you see the size of it? White as bone, eyes like blood. He's just a boy. 15, perhaps 16. Wine flowed freely. Servants brought course after course: roasted boar, honeyed duck, lamprey pie, fresh bread, cheese, fruits from Dorne. Robert ate with abandon, laughing and drinking, his earlier grief forgotten in the celebration. Bards played in the corner, and I caught fragments of a new song they'd already composed, something about the boy with the golden touch and the miracle of the September. The lyrics were terrible, but people listened with rapt attention. I barely touched my food. My stomach was still unsettled from the drain of bringing Jonaran back, and the attention made me uncomfortable. Father leaned close. "Eat something," he murmured. "You need your strength. And try to look less like you're at a funeral." As if to prove his point, a man approached our table, tall, handsome, with golden hair and green eyes that gleamed with intelligence. He wore white armor, and I recognized him immediately even though we'd never met. Sir Jaime Lannister. The Kingslayer. "Lord Stark," Jaime said with a slight bow to father, then turned to me. "And the famous Jon Snow. Or should I say Jon Stark now? I hear the king granted you legitimacy." Word travelled fast in King's Landing. "Sir Jaime," father said coldly. "I merely wished to congratulate the boy on his remarkable achievement," Jaime continued, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "Bringing a man back from death. Quite the trick. I'm curious, does it always work so perfectly? Or are there complications?" I met his gaze steadily. He was fishing, trying to learn if Jonaran had returned with all his memories intact. "Every healing is different, sire," I said carefully. "I do what I can, but I'm not a god. Some things can be mended. Others remain broken." Something flickered in Jaime's eyes, satisfaction, perhaps, or relief. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Well, enjoy the feast, Lord Jon. I suspect you'll be quite popular in the days to come." He walked away, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The feast dragged on for hours. Robert made speeches, raising his cup again and again to toast the miracle boy and the greatest healer in the Seven Kingdoms. Each toast made me more uncomfortable. Finally, as the hall began to empty and the noise died down, Robert pulled me aside. His face was flushed with wine, but his eyes were clear, or as clear as they got after a night of drinking. "Boy," he said, his voice low and serious. "You've done me a great service. A service I can never fully repay. But I want you to name your reward. Whatever it is, I'll give it." "Your Grace," I began carefully, "I ask for one thing, I want you to legitimize me. Make me Jon Stark." Robert blinked in surprise. "Legitimacy? We already talked about that, don't we? You're a Stark in all but name anyway, and now you'll have the name itself." He frowned. "But surely you want more than that? Land? A title? Gold? I want to go to Essos, to live my own life, make my own way. I'll not take anything that belongs to my brother Robb. Winterfell is his. I have no wish for keeps or lordships. I want only my name and my freedom." Robert stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "A sellsword," he said incredulously. "You want to be a sellsword? With a gift like yours, you could rule kingdoms. You could be a king yourself. And you want to throw it all away to swing a sword for coin. My destiny isn't in Westeros, Your Grace," I said firmly. "But if the day comes when you need me, when you call for my help, I'll answer. I swear it." I lied. Robert studied me for a long moment. In his drunken, sentimental state, he saw only what he wanted to see: a noble boy with no ambition, a Stark with honor who wanted no throne, not a dragon spawn. He didn't see the careful planning, the strategic thinking, the need to escape, and strengthening myself. Before the Faith or the Citadel decided I was too dangerous to live. "By the gods," Robert said, shaking his head. "A Stark with honor who wants no throne. Just like Ned." He laughed and clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to make me stagger. "Done, then. I'll send the decree to the Citadel tomorrow. You're Jon Stark now, with all the rights and privileges that come with the name. And you have my leave and my blessing to go wherever you wish. Relief flooded through me. I had it. My legitimacy. My freedom. My escape route. Thank you, Your Grace, I said, bowing. Robert waved me off. Thank you, boy. You gave me back one of the few men I ever truly trusted. For that, you'll always have my gratitude. As I walked back toward the quarters they'd assigned me, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. I was no longer a bastard. I was Jon Stark, legitimized by the king himself. And soon, I would be far from Westeros and all its deadly games. Chapter 5, Lannisters. The next morning brought new problems. I was on the deck of the Sea Dragon, enjoying the fresh air and relative peace, when I saw a figure approaching along the dock. He was old, with a long white beard and the heavy chain of a maester around his neck. Pycelle. I'd seen him at the feast last night, watching me with barely concealed fascination. Now he was here, and I doubted it was a social call. A moment of your time, Lord Jon, Pycelle said when he reached the ship, his voice a honeyed wheeze. The archmaesters of the citadel are most intrigued by your remarkable gift. They've sent word requesting that you visit Old Town for examination. I kept my face neutral. Examination. Nothing invasive, I assure you, Pycelle said, his smile oily. Merely a few simple tests to understand the nature of your abilities. For the benefit of the realm, you understand. Such knowledge could help countless people. Translation: they wanted to study me like a specimen. Figure out how my power worked. And if they decided I was too dangerous, they'd find a way to eliminate the threat. I appreciate the interest, Grand Maester, I said firmly, but I must decline. My ship leaves in a few days, and I have no time for such examinations. Pycelle's smile faltered. Surely you understand the importance. My loyalty is to my king and my family, I interrupted. Not to the citadel. If the archmaesters wish to study healing, they can read their books and practice their arts. But I won't be their subject. Pycelle's face went through several expressions: surprise, indignation, calculation. Finally, he settled on benign concern. I fear you may be making a mistake, my lord. The citadel's support could be quite valuable to a young man such as yourself. And their opposition. He left the threat hanging. I'll take my chances, I said. Pycelle stared at me for a long moment, then bowed stiffly and walked away. Ghost, who'd been lying on the deck, raised his head and watched the Grand Maester leave. A low growl rumbled in his chest. I know, boy, I murmured. Another enemy added to the list. I sat back down on a coil of rope, trying to enjoy the sea air. Father and I would stay a few more days. Then we'd sail back to White Harbor, and I'd make my final preparations for Essos. Just a few more days. I could manage that. That same afternoon, a Lannister guard in polished armor approached the ship. Lord Jon Stark, he said formally. Lord Tywin Lannister has requested an audience with you. He arrived in King's Landing this morning and would speak with you immediately. My stomach dropped. Tywin Lannister. The most powerful man in Westeros, the ruthless pragmatist who let nothing stand in his way. And he wanted to talk to me. Lead the way, I said, keeping my voice steady. Ghost rose to follow, and the guard's eyes widened slightly. But he didn't object, probably because he was too smart to try stopping a dire wolf the size of a horse. We were led through the city to a private chamber in the Red Keep. The room was austere but expensive. Every piece of furniture, every tapestry spoke of wealth and power. Tywin sat behind a large oak desk. Standing beside the desk, goblet of wine in hand, was the Tyrion Lannister. He was small, perhaps 4.5 feet tall, with a large head and mismatched legs. His face was clever and sardonic. He watched me with open curiosity as I entered. I sat in the chair across from him, acutely aware of Ghost's presence at my side and the two Lannisters studying me. "I had no idea father believed in fairy tales," Tyrion said, swirling his wine. His voice was higher than his brother's, but rich with wit. Tywin's eyes never left mine. "I witnessed the proof myself. Jonaran walks and talks, brought back from 6 days of death. That is no fairy tale." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "I have a proposition for you, boy. A problem that requires a unique solution." For just a moment so brief I almost missed it, his eyes flickered to Tyrion. "I want you to use your gift on my son. I want you to make him whole. A man in all respects, not a..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Not a mockery of what a Lannister should be." The room went utterly silent. Tyrion's face went blank, carefully neutral, but I saw the flash of pain in his eyes before he hid it. Tywin wanted me to cure Tyrion's dwarfism. Change him fundamentally, reshape his entire body from the genetic level up. Not healing an injury or reversing death, but rewriting the very blueprint of a person. And Tyrion. I'd always liked him in the books. Clever, cynical, but fundamentally decent despite the cruelty he'd endured. Changing him seemed wrong somehow, like erasing part of who he was. But this was also an opportunity. Tywin Lannister was the richest man in Westeros. If I did this, I could name my price. I could get the funding I needed for Essos, for building an army, for preparing for what was coming. "I can do it," I said carefully. "But it won't be easy. And I'll require payment. 100,000 gold dragons." Tyrion choked on his wine. 100,000. Tywin didn't even blink. "Done. And I've already had the materials prepared." He stood and led me to an adjoining room. The sight that greeted me was surreal. In the center of the room was a soft, expensive bed. But beside it was a massive pile of freshly cut greenwood branches, logs, all still living. Enough to build a small house. Tywin had received words about Jonaran's resurrection and immediately understood what I would need. "Get on the bed, Tyrion," Tywin commanded. Tyrion looked between his father and me, his expression unreadable. Then he shrugged and climbed onto the bed, settling back against the pillows. "Well," he said dryly, "this should be interesting." Before I could begin, the door burst open. Cersei Lannister swept in, her beautiful face twisted with fury. "Father! What is the meaning of this?" Her golden hair swirled as she spun to face Tywin. "You cannot believe this nonsense. This charlatan's tricks." "Get out," Tywin said quietly. "Father, I..." "Now." Tywin gestured to the guards at the door. They moved forward, and Cersei's face went purple with rage. "You'll regret this," she shrieked as they took her arms. "All of you. This is madness." Her screams echoed down the corridor as they dragged her away, finally fading to silence. Tywin turned back to me as if nothing had happened. "Begin." I looked at Tyrion, who'd watched the whole scene with that same carefully neutral expression. "This will be uncomfortable," I warned him, moving to stand beside the bed. Tyrion's eyes met mine, mismatched colors, one green and one black. "Pain is an old friend, Jon Snow, or I say Stark now. Do what you must." I placed one hand on his chest and the other on the pile of green wood. Then I closed my eyes and began the most complex work of my life. Chapter 6, Tyrion. I reached out with my power, feeling the life in Tyrion's body first. His heart beat steadily beneath my palm, strong, despite everything. His blood flowed, his lungs drew breath, all the machinery of life working as it should. But the structure was wrong. I could sense it, the twisted genetic code that had shaped his bones differently, compressed his growth, altered his proportions. It was fundamental, written into every cell of his body from the moment of conception. To fix it, I would have to rewrite him entirely. "This will take hours," I said, opening my eyes. "And it will hurt," no matter how careful I am. Your entire body will be restructuring itself while you're conscious. Can you put him to sleep? Tywin asked. I shook my head. I need him conscious. I need to monitor his responses, make sure his brain and nervous system adapt properly as the changes happen. If he's unconscious, I might miss something critical. Tyrion laughed a short, bitter sound. Of course. Nothing about me can ever be simple. He looked up at me. Do it, then. Let's see if a Lannister can be unmade and remade in a single afternoon. I turned to the pile of green wood and began drawing water, nutrients, proteins, sugars, all the raw building blocks I would need. Then I began feeding it into Tyrion's body. The first changes were internal. I started with his skeletal structure, because everything else would depend on it. His bones were dense and strong, but compressed, shortened. I needed to lengthen them, straighten them, reshape them. Legs first. Carefully, meticulously, I guided new bone growth. Tyrion's hands clenched on the sheets. His breathing quickened. Talk to me, I said. Tell me what you feel. Like my legs are being pulled apart by horses, he gritted out. Very slowly. And from the inside. That's normal. The pain means your nerves are intact and responding. If it goes numb, tell me immediately. I kept working, one bone at a time. His spine was particularly delicate. Sweat beaded on Tyrion's forehead. His jaw was clenched so tight I worried about his teeth. Father always said I was a disappointment, he managed through gritted teeth. I don't think, this is what he meant, by improving myself. Hours passed. The pile of green wood shrank as I consumed it, feeding more and more biomass into Tyrion's transforming body. His legs were longer now, properly proportioned. His spine was straight. I moved to his arms, his ribs, his skull. The skull was the most dangerous part. I had to be extraordinarily careful the brain couldn't be damaged, couldn't be compressed or stretched incorrectly. Tyrion had stopped talking. His eyes were closed, his face pale and drenched in sweat. But he was still breathing steadily, still conscious. Almost done, I murmured. The muscles came next. They had to be rebuilt, entirely new fibers grown, attached to bones that were now in completely different positions. His organs shifted as his torso expanded and straightened. I guided each one carefully, ensuring proper placement, proper connections. When I finally pulled my hands away, I was shaking with exhaustion. The room spun slightly, and I had to grab the edge of the bed to steady myself. Tyrion lay on the bed, his body transformed. He had to be close to 6 feet tall now, his limbs straight and properly proportioned, his torso no longer compressed. His face still held the same sharp intelligence, the same sardonic awareness, but the structure was different, still clearly him, but refined, perfected. He looked like Jaime now. Not identical, but unmistakably brothers in a way they hadn't been before. It's done, I said, my voice hoarse. Tywin had stood motionless throughout the entire process, watching with that calculating gaze. Now he stepped forward, studying his son with an expression I couldn't quite read. Tyrion's eyes opened slowly. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment, then carefully, very carefully sat up. His movements were uncertain, uncoordinated. His muscles were there, but weak, unused to their new configuration. He looked down at his hands, his arms, his legs. By all the gods, he whispered. He swung his legs off the bed and tried to stand. His legs buckled immediately, and Tywin caught him the first time I'd seen the Lord of Casterly Rock show anything resembling paternal instinct. Your muscles are weak, I said, leaning against the wall to keep myself upright. They're built, but not developed. You'll need to exercise, train them. It will take time before you have full strength and coordination. Tyrion looked down at himself, at arms that were the right length, legs that were straight and long. He touched his face, his chest, as if confirming he was real. He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. You're a Lannister, Tywin said quietly. In body as well as name. As you should have been from birth. Something complicated passed across Tyrion's face, relief, grief, anger, gratitude, all mixed together. He looked at me, and his mismatched eyes were bright with unshed tears. I've spent my entire life being called a monster, a demon, a curse. I've survived spite and hatred because I was born wrong. And now? He looked down at his new body. Now I'm not wrong anymore. He laughed a strange, broken sound. I don't know whether to thank you or hate you, Jon Stark. You can decide later, I said. Right now, you need to rest. Your body has been through trauma. Real food, water, sleep in that order. Tywin helped Tyrion back onto the bed. The great lord of Casterly Rock showed his son a gentleness I wouldn't have thought him capable of. The gold will be delivered to your ship tomorrow morning, Tywin said, turning to me. 100,000 dragons, as agreed. He studied me for a long moment. You've given me back my son, he said. The son I should have had from the beginning. That is worth far more than gold. He paused. If you ever need the support of House Lannister, you have only to ask. I nodded, too exhausted to fully process what that offer might mean. I need to rest, I said. Of course. Tywin gestured to the guards. Escort Lord Stark back to his ship. See that he's not disturbed. Ghost and I made our way back through the Red Keep in a daze. My legs felt like water, my head swam, and every step was an effort. When we reached the ship, I collapsed onto my bunk without even removing my boots. Ghost lay down beside the narrow bed, his massive body taking up most of the floor space. The implications were staggering. If I could do this for Tyrion, what else could I do? Could I make soldiers stronger, faster? Could I give people abilities they were never born with? Could I create an army of enhanced warriors? The possibilities were both exhilarating and terrifying. But right now, I was too tired to think about any of it. I closed my eyes and let exhaustion pull me under. Chapter 7, The Dragon Bone. True to his word, Tywin had 100,000 gold dragons delivered to the Sea Dragon. The chest was enormous, requiring 4 men to carry it. The weight of it, both literal and metaphorical, settled in the ship's hold. Father spent his days with King Robert. Jonathan had recovered enough to resume his duties, weakened, confused by the gaps in his memory, but alive and determined to continue serving. Robert had been relieved when Jon insisted on returning to his position. Being king was burden enough without also managing the day-to-day activities. I stayed on the ship mostly, avoiding the Red Keep and its endless political games. But I had one final task before leaving King's Landing. On the night before our departure, I slipped away from the ship. I was looking for a specific place. A room deep beneath the Red Keep where the dragon skulls are stored. I already find hidden passage that Arya stumbled upon while following that cat. I saw enormous dragon skulls lined the walls. I walked slowly through the chamber, my footsteps echoing. These were the remains of House Targaryen's, my house's power, the dragons that had conquered Westeros, forged the Iron Throne, made kings kneel. At the far end of the chamber, I found what I was looking for. Balryan the Black Dread. The largest skull of all, so massive it dominated the entire wall. This dragon had been ridden by Aegon the Conqueror himself. It had burned Harrenhal, destroyed armies, lived for nearly 200 years. I approached slowly, reverently. I placed my hand on the bone, feeling its texture smooth in places, rough in others. And then I reached out with my biokinesis, sensing deeper. The bone was old, mineralized, but not entirely dead. There was still something there, trace amounts of organic material, preserved in the densest parts of the skull. Proteins, DNA fragments, cellular remnants that had somehow survived the centuries. The actual structure of a creature that shouldn't have been able to exist, something that flew despite physics, breathed fire despite chemistry. I couldn't take the whole skull. That would be noticed immediately. But I could take a small piece. I focused my power on a section of bone near the back of the skull, a piece about the size of my palm, hidden where no one would notice its absence. I carefully separated it from the main structure, using my biokinesis to make a clean break that looked natural, like the bone had simply cracked with age. The piece came away in my hand. It was heavy like piece of metal. Now with enough biomass I can create dragon, or I can clone the Black Dread himself. I carefully wrapped the bone fragment in cloth and tucked it inside my shirt. Then I turned and made my way back through the tunnels. I returned to the ship few hours before dawn. Ghost was waiting, and he huffed when he caught the scent of ancient dragon bone on me. "Don't judge," I murmured, scratching behind his ears. "We need every advantage we can get." I hid the bone fragment in the bottom of my personal chest, wrapped in layers of cloth and buried beneath clothes and supplies. By the time the sun rose, I was back on deck, looking like I'd never left. Father came to the ship that morning. "It's time," he said simply. I'd known this was coming. Father would return to Winterfell, his duty to the king fulfilled by bringing me to save Narration. I would sail to Essos to build whatever future awaited me there. We stood on the deck together, Ghost between us, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "I don't know when I'll see you again," Father said finally. "If I'll see you again." "You will," I said. "When winter comes, I'll be ready. I'll come back." "Winter is always coming," Father said quietly. I looked at him, at this man who'd raised me despite the scandal, who'd protected me, who'd trusted me even after learning what I could do. "The long night is coming," I said quietly. "And when it does, Westeros will need every advantage it can get." Father's grey eyes searched my face. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He pulled me into an embrace, brief, fierce, unexpected. "Then go. Build, learn what you need to learn. But remember who you are, Jon. Remember you're a Stark." "I'll remember." He released me and stepped back. "I'm sailing back to White Harbor today, then riding for Winterfell. I'll tell your siblings you left with honor and purpose. Arya especially, she'll want to know you're safe. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't say goodbye in person." "I will." He looked at Ghost. "Take care of him." Ghost huffed almost like agreement. Father clasped my shoulder once more, then walked down the gangplank without looking back. I watched him disappear into the crowded streets of King's Landing, heading toward his own ship and the long journey home to the north. 2 ships leaving King's Landing. One heading north to Winterfell. One heading east to Essos. "Cast off," the captain called. But my ship wouldn't leave until tomorrow. I had one more night in King's Landing, one more chance to prepare. That evening, I met with the captain of a different vessel, a Brava sea trader named Teres, who'd agreed to take me across the narrow sea for a generous fee. "We sail at dawn," he said in accented common tongue. "Bravos first, then wherever you wish to go. Your companion." He glanced nervously at Ghost. "He will stay below deck during the voyage, yes." "He'll stay where I stay," I said firmly. "But he won't cause trouble." Teres didn't look convinced, but the gold I'd already paid him was apparently enough to overcome his doubts. Dawn broke grey and cold over King's Landing. I stood on the deck of Teres's ship, the Water Dancer, and watched the Red Keep fade into the distance. Ghost sat beside me, his massive form drawing nervous glances from the crew. But they gave us space, and that was all I needed. I have made many enemies in King's Landing before I even arrived here, but I also got Dragon Bone and kept Ned Stark safe. The voyage to Bravos would take 2 weeks if the winds were favorable. I spent the time studying the Dragon Bone fragment in private, understanding its genetics. Chapter 8, Heretic. Septon Reynald stood at the prow of the prayer, holding a cloth soaked in rose water to his nose, trying to block out the reek of unwashed bodies, stale beer, and the peculiar rotting fish smell that seemed to cling to all those damned squid worshippers. The Faith had insisted he take iron-born sailors for this mission. They knew these waters, they feared nothing, and they could be paid to keep their mouths shut. But by the Seven, they were animals. Behind him, the sellswords weren't much better. A dozen hard men from the disputed lands, cutthroats and killers who'd murder their own mothers for a handful of silver. They lounged on the deck, drinking, gambling, scratching themselves like the vermin they were. "This is the Faith's gold they waste on wine," Reynald muttered, watching one particularly brutish sellsword-scarred man called Harger pour another cup. "Gold meant for holy work, west on these sinners." But what choice did he have? The High Septon himself had given Reynald this sacred mission: find the heretic who dared to raise the dead, who wielded unnatural powers in defiance of the Seven's will, and deliver the Father's justice. Jon Stark. The abomination from the north who'd defiled the Great September with his sorcery, who'd brought a corpse back to shambling life like the great others from the old stories. The boy had fled to Essos like the coward he was, but the Seven's reach was long. And Septon Reynald would be the instrument of divine justice. He touched the seven-pointed star hanging from his neck, feeling its reassuring weight. He was doing the God's work. He was pure, righteous, chosen. Not like these animals he'd been forced to travel with. "Oi, holy man," one of the Ironborn called from the helm. "We're making good time. Should reach Bravu's waters by nightfall tomorrow." Reynald didn't deign to respond. Speaking to these heathens was beneath him. The Ironborn captain, a gap-toothed savage who called himself Dagon, spat over the rail. "He might already be in Bravu's. The Seven will guide us to him," Reynald said coldly. His blasphemy cannot hide from divine sight. Actually, it was the Citadel's network of informants that had tracked the heretic, but Reynald preferred to think of it as divine providence. A boy, around 8 days old, gets Reynald mug of arbor gold, most expensive wine on ship. As Reynald's hand touched boy instinctively jerked back. Boy continued to look down on floor and move away from Reynald. Reynald saw dark red blood between boy's legs. "He has brought that boy for 5 gold coin from brothel in the old town. He even let his friend who is maester made some changes in his body. Continue to serve me like this, and the Seven will accept." Reynald never finished the sentence. There was a sound, a sharp hiss like wind through a narrow gap, and then Harger's raised hand simply stopped. The sellsword looked down at his chest with confusion. There was a hole there. A perfectly round hole, the size of a fist, punched clean through leather armor, flesh, bone. Reynald could see through it to the grey sky beyond. Blood sprayed from Harger's mouth, then crashed to the deck like a felled tree. The boy scrambled backward, screaming. For a moment, everyone on deck froze, staring at the impossible corpse. Then Reynald's eyes tracked upward, following the trajectory of whatever had killed Harger. A raven perched on the mast sail above them. But not just any raven. This bird was covered in blood, fresh, red, dripping. As Reynald watched in horror, droplets fell from its feathers onto the white sail, leaving crimson streaks like paint. The raven's black eyes fixed on him. And Reynald knew, with absolute certainty, that he was looking at something unnatural. "What in the drowned god's name?" Dagon started. The raven moved. It didn't fly so much as shoot forward, a black blur of impossible speed. One of the Ironborn sailors exploded. There was no other word for it. His torso simply came apart in a spray of blood and bone as the raven punched through him like he was made of parchment. The bird didn't stop. It banked sharply, diving toward the sellswords clustered near the stern. Chaos erupted. Men screamed, reaching for weapons. But steel was useless against something that moved like lightning. The raven tore through them, literally through them. Reynald watched in frozen horror as it flew straight through a sellsword's chest, leaving a gaping hole, then wheeled and came back to do it again to another man. Blood sprayed across the deck. Bodies fell, twitching. "It's the 7 damned heretic," one of the sellswords shrieked. "He sent a demon." The raven flew through his skull. The man's head simply emptied. He collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. Reynald backed against the rail, his heart hammering. This couldn't be happening. This was impossible. Ravens they couldn't. The bird turned its attention to the ship itself. It dove toward the hull, and Reynald heard a sickening crack as it punched a hole straight through the wooden planks below the waterline. Then another. Then another. Water began flooding in. The Ironborn tried to fight back. The captain gurgled and fell, blood fontaining. The ship was dying. Reynald could feel it listing, taking on water fast. All around him, men were dying, torn apart by a single bird that moved with unholy speed and struck with the force of a ballista bolt. "Please," Reynald whispered, clutching his 7-pointed star. "Father above, Mother protect us, Warrior give us strength." The raven landed on a broken piece of sail 10 feet away, its black eyes now fixed on Reynald. Up close, he could see it clearly. Blood dripped from its beak, its talons, its feathers. But beneath the blood, there was a wrongness to its movements. Reynald's mind flashed to the stories. The heretic could create life, they said. Could reshape flesh and bone. "You," he whispered. "It's you, aren't you? Bastard, Jon Snow." "I'm doing the Seven's work," he shrieked, his voice breaking. "You're a heretic. A blasphemer. You mock the natural order." The raven hopped closer. "I'm righteous. I'm pure. I serve the gods." Reynald's back pressed against the rail. There was nowhere left to go. You're a monster. An abomination. You deserve to die." The raven took flight. Reynald saw it coming, saw the blood-soaked bird arrowing toward his face. POV, Jon Stark. I pulled out of the warg connection and opened my eyes, gasping. I was in the cab of my ship, sitting cross-legged on the floor with Ghost lying beside me. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting long shadows. My hands were shaking, but after few moments it stopped. I'd just killed over a dozen men. Brutally. Efficiently. Without mercy. Through a train. Ghost raised his head and looked at me with those intelligent red eyes. I'd known this was coming. The Faith saw me as a blasphemer. The Citadel saw me as a threat. And both decided that the solution was assassination. I'd sent a train to intercept them before they reached our ship. "I need to move faster," I said to Ghost. "Build stronger defenses. Create more magic beast like a train. Even send few to Winterfell as well." Chapter 9, Iron Bank. The Titan of Bravos rose from the sea mist like some ancient god of bronze and stone, its sword raised toward the grey sky. I stood at the ship's rail, one hand resting on Ghost's massive head, and watched as we passed beneath those tremendous legs. The statue's hollow eyes seemed to follow us. This is what men can build when they're free, I thought. No kings. No lords. Just coin and wool. The harbour opened before us, a forest of masts and rigging, ships from every corner of the known world crowding the docks. Bravasi merchantmen with their purple sails. Lysani pleasure barges painted in garish colors. Even a summer islander swan ship, its hull carved and gilded to catch the morning light. Captain came to stand beside me. He'd been glancing at Ghost throughout the voyage, never quite comfortable with a dire wolf the size of a warhorse sleeping on his deck. Now he cleared his throat. "My lord," he said in his thick Bravasi accent. "We'll be docking within the hour. About your companion." "I know," I said. "He'll need somewhere private. Away from crowds." He nodded. "If I may suggest, my lord, your first stop should be the Iron Bank. They can help with other arrangements. Housing. Documentation. The sort of things that smooth a foreigner's path in Bravos." Sound advice, I said. Thank you, Captain. The docking took longer than I'd hoped. Harbor officials boarded to inspect the cargo, collect fees, ask tedious questions about where we'd sailed from and what business we had in Bravus. When we finally received clearance to disembark, the sun was climbing toward noon. I'd arranged for my heavy chest, the one containing the bulk of my fortune, to be loaded onto a sturdy cart. 4 dock workers strained under its weight, cursing in Bravasi and what sounded like Volantine. I'd kept back a purse of gold for immediate needs, but the rest needed to be secured properly. Getting Ghost off the ship proved to be the most delicate operation. I waited until the midday crowd had thinned slightly, then led him down the gangplank. The effect was immediate. Conversations stopped. People backed away. A woman crossing the dock with a basket of fish dropped it, the contents spilling across the weathered planks. A city watchman's hand went to his sword, then froze when Ghost's gaze fixed on him. Easy, I murmured, keeping my hand on Ghost's head. Through our bond, I felt his unease. Too many people. Too many smells. Too much noise pressing in from all sides. I'd hired 2 guards to accompany the cart carrying my gold. They looked at Ghost, looked at each other, then took up positions flanking the cart without comment. We made our way through the docks slowly. Ghost drew stares wherever we went, of course he did. But the Bravasi were a practical people. They looked, they whispered, but they kept their distance. A young man with a fortune and a monster at his side was clearly not someone to trifle with. The Iron Bank stood in the heart of the city, an enormous building of dark bronze and black marble. It dominated the square around it, making even the grand temples and guild halls look small. This was the true power in Bravus, not the Sea Lord in his palace. I stopped at the base of the broad marble steps leading up to the entrance. Ghost couldn't come inside, that much was obvious. But leaving him alone in the square was equally impossible. Stay here, boy, I told him, kneeling to look into his red eyes. I'll be as quick as I can. He settled onto his haunches at the base of the steps, as immovable as a statue. People gave him a wide berth, crossing to the far side of the square rather than pass too close. The 2 guards remained with the cart. I took only my purse of gold and climbed the steps alone. The interior of the Iron Bank was as imposing as its exterior. The entrance hall soared 3 stories high, its walls lined with bronze columns that gleamed dully in the light from high windows. A functionary approached, a thin man in dark robes. He looked me up and down, taking in my northern clothes. "How may the Iron Bank serve you?" he asked in perfect common tongue. "I wish to open an account," I said. "And to make a deposit." "Of course. If you'll follow me." He led me through a maze of corridors, until we reached a private chamber. The chamber was small, a ironwood desk dominated the space, and behind it sat a woman of perhaps 40 years. "Sarah Turnicio," the functionary said, bowing slightly to her. "A potential client who wishes to establish an account." "Leave us," Turnicio said to the functionary, who bowed and departed, closing the door behind him. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "Wine?" "No, thank you." "Wise. Never drink when discussing money." She folded her hands on the desk. "I am Sarah Turnicio, a keeper of accounts at the Iron Bank. You wish to deposit gold?" 100,000 gold dragons, I said, watching her reaction carefully. To her credit, she barely blinked. "A significant sum. May I ask the source of these funds?" "Payment for services rendered to House Lannister." I pulled out the letters I'd carefully preserved, sealed documents from Tywin Lannister and King Robert, each one confirming payment for my work. I'd made sure to get them in writing, knowing I'd need proof eventually. Turnicio read both letters slowly, her eyes moving over the seals, the signatures, the precise wording. Finally, she set them down. "Jon Stark," she said, reading my name from the documents. "Legitimized by royal decree. A healer of unusual skill. She looked up at me. The Iron Bank has received reports from Westeros. About a boy who brought a man back from death. That was you. Yes. And that beast currently frightening merchants in our square, that would be yours as well. Yes. She leaned back in her chair, studying me anew. You're very young to have such powerful enemies. My stomach tightened. Enemies. The faith of the Seven has declared you an abomination. The Citadel considers you a threat to the natural order. Both institutions have considerable reach, even here in Bravos. She tapped one finger on her desk. The Iron Bank does not normally concern itself with religious or philosophical disputes. So you don't have to worry about them. I'm looking for more than just a place to store gold, I said carefully. I need legitimacy. Documentation that establishes me as a legal resident of Bravos. Property where I can live and work without interference. Staff who can be trusted to be discreet. In other words, you want to become a Bravasi. Yes. Ternasio was quiet for a long moment, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. I could almost see her mind working, calculating risks and rewards, weighing possibilities. The Iron Bank can provide all of that, she said finally. For the right price. Name it. 5% of your initial deposit. 5,000 gold dragons. In exchange, we will establish you as a legal resident of Bravos, with all the rights and protections that entails. We will assist in finding suitable property private, defensible, away from prying eyes. We will provide servants who understand the value of silence. 5,000 dragons. A fortune by most standards, but a small price for safety and legitimacy. Done, I said. Ternasio allowed herself a small smile. Excellent. Now, let us discuss the particulars of your account. The process took hours. Documents were prepared and signed, each one in triplicate, each seal carefully applied. My gold was counted, weighed, verified. 95,000 dragons went into the bank's vaults, secured behind walls of iron and bronze and watched by guards who would kill without hesitation. The remaining 5,000 were noted as the bank's fee, recorded in their meticulous ledgers. When the financial arrangements were complete, Ternasio called in another functionary, a younger man named Coro who spoke common tongue with barely an accent. Coro handles property acquisitions for our foreign clients, Ternasio explained. He will help you find suitable accommodation. Coro bowed. My Lord Stark. Sarah Ternasio has briefed me on your requirements. I believe I have several properties that might suit. Would you prefer to view them today, or? Today, I said. The sooner I have somewhere private, the better. Of course. I'll arrange for a litter. No litter. I have a cart, and I'll be bringing my companion. Coro glanced at Ternasio, who nodded slightly. As you wish, my lord. Shall we? Chapter 10, Thunderfish. Ghost was exactly where I'd left him, still sitting at the base of the steps like a white statue. A crowd had gathered at a distance, gawking. When I emerged from the bank, Ghost rose immediately, tail wagging slightly. Let's go, I said, running my hand through his thick fur. Time to find you a proper home. Coro eyed Ghost warily but said nothing. We made our way through the city, the cart rumbling behind us, with Coro providing a running commentary on Bravasi history and architecture that I barely listened to. The properties he showed me were all adequate townhouses in respectable neighborhoods, apartments near the canals, even a small palazzo that some minor noble had lost to gambling debts. But none of them felt right. Too exposed. Too many neighbors. Many prying eyes. Is there nothing more private? I asked as we viewed the fourth property. Away from the city center. Coro thought for a moment. Place I show you where most isolated, there is one property. North of the city, perhaps 2 miles beyond the walls. A small manor house on a rise overlooking the sea. It's been empty for several months. The previous owner died, and his heir is eager to sell. The location is quite isolated, which most clients find undesirable, but given your requirements. Show me. The manor house was Bravasi-in style, whitewashed stone walls, a red tile roof, wooden shutters to keep out the sun. Not large, but solidly built. 2 stories, perhaps a dozen rooms. Gardens that had grown somewhat wild in the months of neglect. But what truly mattered were the walls 8 feet high, built of good stone, topped with iron spikes. And the gates solid oak banded with iron, with bars that could be dropped into place from within. Private. Defensible. Perfect. Ghost immediately began exploring the grounds, nose to the earth, investigating every corner. The house needs work, Koro admitted as we walked through the dusty interior. It's been empty for a year. But the structure is sound. We haggled there in the empty main hall. I'll need it ready to occupy within 3 days, I said. Cleaned, aired out, basic furnishings. That can be arranged, my lord. And servants? Discreet servants. People who understand that what happens within these walls stays within these walls. Koro nodded. The Iron Bank has a list of such individuals. A housekeeper, a cook, a cleaning girl, and someone to handle the grounds. No more than 4 people total. Very good, my lord. I'll have candidates selected by tomorrow. 3 days later, I moved into my new home on a grey afternoon. True to their word, the Iron Bank had transformed the place. The house had been cleaned from top to bottom, the musty smell of disuse replaced by the scent of lemon oil and fresh air. Furniture had been brought in simple but well-made pieces that wouldn't look out of place in a minor noble's household. The staff assembled in the entrance hall as my cart arrived. Koro had chosen well 4 people who looked competent and, more importantly, incurious. Talia, the housekeeper, was a woman of middle years. My lord, she said with a small bow. Welcome home. Beside her stood Mora, a stout cook who looked like she could wrestle a bull. Then Lana, a thin slip of a girl who kept her eyes downcast. And finally Sorrow, a grizzled man with the look of a former sellsword, who would handle the grounds and stable. Thank you, I said as Ghost padded through the door, nearly filling it with his massive frame. To their credit, none of the servants flinched, though I saw Lana's eyes widen slightly. I won't be an easy master to serve. I keep strange hours. I have work that requires privacy. They all nodded. The Iron Bank vouches for your discretion, I continued. But understand this: what you see here, what you learn about my work, stays here. That's not a request. It's the condition of your employment. We understand, my lord, Talia said, speaking for all of them. The Iron Bank made the terms very clear. The morning after I'd settled into the manor, I dressed in simple clothes: dark wool trousers, a linen shirt, a leather vest. Talia had breakfast waiting when I came downstairs: fresh bread still warm from the oven, soft cheese, sliced figs, and strong black tea that tasted nothing like what we drank in the north. Will you be going into the city, my lord? She asked as I ate. Yes. I need to familiarize myself with Bravus. Learn the streets, find suppliers for various things. She nodded, understanding that I didn't want to elaborate. Sorrow can accompany you if you wish. He knows the city well. No. I'll go alone. I paused, considering. Ghost should stay here. Draw less attention that way. The walk into Bravus took the better part of an hour. A train was constantly hovering above me, in case something go wrong. I passed the temples: the September of the Sea for those who still followed the 7, the Temple of the Moonsingers, shrines to a dozen gods whose names I didn't recognize. In Bravus, all gods were welcome. All gods were equally ignored by the practical Bravasi, who put their faith in coin. Near midday, I found myself in a district I hadn't explored yet: quieter streets, fewer crowds, shops that catered to more unusual tastes. One shop in particular caught my eye. Through the windows, I could see cages, wooden tanks, movements that suggested living creatures within. The shop's interior was dim and humid, the air was filled with smells of animals. Cages lined the walls, containing birds of every color and description. Tanks, or I say wooden barrel containing various fish. A man emerged from behind a curtain, tall, rail-thin, with the dark skin of a summer islander. "Welcome, welcome," he said in broken common. "Xandero, owner of this small shop, are you interested in my collection? I think. Can you show me around?" "Why not? I have rare, exotic, unusual birds that can speak human words. A fish which can fly, whatever a client desires, I can find. For a price." I studied the cages as he spoke. Here was a raven not as large as a train, but a fine specimen nonetheless. There was a golden eagle with a wingspan that must have been 6 feet, eyeing me with predatory intelligence. Barrel-held fish of every variety, some I recognized, others completely alien. In a large barrel near the back, something long and sinuous moved through water. As I approached, it became visible, a serpentine fish perhaps 4 feet long, dark grey-blue, with a blunt head. "Ah," Xandero said, noting my interest. "The thunder fish. Very rare. From the rivers of the Summer Isles. It kills prey with lightning from its own body. Touch the water when it's angry, and you'll feel the shock through your entire arm. Quite deadly in the right circumstances. An electric eel. I'd read about them in my past life, studied their biology. The eel's ability to generate electricity was biological, specialized cells that functioned like living batteries, producing voltage through ion channels. If I could study that mechanism, understand how it worked at the cellular level and apply magic circulation system in it." "How much?" I asked. Xandero named a price steep, but not unreasonable for something so rare and dangerous. "The barrel is included, of course. And the creature is fed live fish, small ones. 3 or 4 a week." "I'll take it," I said. "And that eagle as well." "And?" I scanned the other cages. 4 of those ravens. "The largest ones you have." Xandero's eyebrows rose. "Building quite a collection, my friend. May I ask what for?" "Study," I said simply. It was close enough to the truth. He didn't need to know I was studying them to understand their biology well enough to replicate and enhance it. Of course, of course." Xandero began calculating. "With the eagle and the ravens, shall we say 200 gold for everything? Including delivery to your residence and proper caging." It was expensive, but I had gold to spare, and these creatures were investments. Tools for my work. 150, I countered. We haggled back and forth, eventually settling on 175 gold dragons. I gave him the address of my manor and promised to have payment ready when the creatures were delivered the following day. "A pleasure doing business, my lord," Xandero said, showing his filed teeth again. "If you need anything else, rare creatures, unusual specimens, you come to Xandero, yes? I can find anything, given time and coin." "I'll remember," I said. I spent another hour browsing other shops in the district, an apothecary with shelves full of herbs and minerals, a bookseller with texts in a dozen languages, even a swordsmith whose blades looked sharp enough to split hairs. I made mental notes of their locations, knowing I'd need their services eventually. By mid-afternoon, my stomach was growling. I'd eaten only Talia's breakfast, and walking the city for hours had left me famished. I found a restaurant near one of the larger canals, a place called the Silver Carp, with tables both inside and on a balcony overlooking the water. The menu was written in Bastard Valyrian and common tongue, offering dishes I'd never heard of. I ordered blindly. The food was unlike anything I'd eaten in Westeros. Lighter, brighter flavors. Heavy use of olive oil and lemon. I ate slowly, watching the city flow past. Gondolas glided beneath the balcony. Street performers juggled and sang for coins. The walk back to the city gates took me through different streets than I'd used coming in. I wanted to see as much as possible, to build a mental map of the city's layout. I was perhaps halfway to the gates, moving through a district of warehouses and shipping offices, when I became aware of footsteps behind me. Chapter 11, Modified Crops? I quickly warged into a train, but only thing I able to see about that person was a shadow as it disappeared in crowded street. Jon Stark, same time someone call me from behind. Two men stood about 10 paces. Both wore the purple cloaks and silver badges of Bravasi City Guard. My hand didn't go to my sword, but every muscle tensed. Yes. The Sea Lord requests your presence, the guard said. His tone was polite but firm. Not a request, despite the wording. If you would accompany us, my lord. My mind raced. The Sea Lord of Bravos was the closest thing the city had to a ruler, but he held no absolute power. The Iron Bank answered to him, at least in theory. When does the Sea Lord wish to meet? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Now, my lord, the guard said. He is waiting at the Sea Lord's palace. It's not far. Lead the way, I said. The guards exchanged a glance, and I saw a flicker of relief. We walked through the city, attracting curious glances. Two guards escorting a young foreigner. It wasn't common, but it wasn't unheard of either. Bravos was a city of laws, and those who broke them were brought before magistrates. I hadn't broken any laws. At least, none that anyone knew about. The Sea Lord's palace rose ahead of us, not as grand as the Red Keep, but impressive in its own way. White marble and bronze, with gardens that must have cost a fortune to maintain. We climbed the steps, passed through bronze doors tall enough for giants, entered a hall where moonlight streamed through stained glass windows depicting Bravos' history, the breaking of the chains, the founding of the city, and the carving of the Titan. At the far end of the hall, seated on a chair of dark wood and purple cushions, the Sea Lord of Bravos. He was older than I'd expected, perhaps 60, with grey hair and a beard trimmed in the Bravasi style. His robes were purple and silver. Jon Stark, Sea Lord said, welcome to Bravos. I've been very curious to meet you. You may leave us, the Sea Lord said without turning to the guards. They bowed and left. We were alone. Or at least, apparently alone. In a place like this, I suspected there were always eyes watching, ears listening from behind walls and beneath floors. Please, sit, the Sea Lord gestured to a cushioned chair positioned before his seat. I am Farrago Antarian, in my 6th year as Sea Lord of this great city. I'm honored by your attention, Sea Lord Antarian. The Iron Bank informed me of your arrival, a courtesy they extend for significant depositors. He leaned forward slightly. I make it my business to know everyone who enters my city with both gold and secrets. You, Jon Stark, have an abundance of both. I seek only to live quietly, I said carefully. To study and work without interference. Quietly. Farrago's eyebrow rose. You arrive with a dire wolf the size of a destrier. You purchase a fortified manor outside the city walls. You deposit enough gold to fund a small war. That is many things, young lord, but quiet is not among them. Fair point. What is it you want from me, Sea Lord? I asked directly. Dancing around the issue felt pointless with a man like this. Information, first. Then, possibly, an alliance. He stood and walked to the windows, hands clasped behind his back. The Iron Bank's reports mentioned King Robert's gratitude for your healing of Lord Jonaran. They say you brought him back from death itself. 6 days dead, and you restored him to life. I said nothing, waiting. They also say the Faith of the Seven has declared you an abomination. That the Citadel considers you a threat. That several assassination attempts have already been made on your life, attempts that failed rather spectacularly, if reports are to be believed. So he'd heard about the Septon's ship. Of course he had. Bravus had eyes everywhere. I defend myself when necessary, I said. Indeed. Farrago turned back to face me. Here is what I know. You possess abilities that defy conventional understanding. Healing, certainly. Perhaps more. Your dire wolf is no natural creature, it's been enhanced somehow. He returned to his seat, studying me with those calculating eyes. Now, here is what I want. Bravus prides itself on freedom, on practical thinking unburdened by superstition. We don't fear what others call magic, we use it, if it proves useful. The warlocks of Karth, the red priests of Volantis, even the faceless men all practice arts that the Citadel would call impossible. We don't care. We care only whether something works. And you think I can be useful, I said. I know you can. Farrago leaned forward. You revived man who was dead for days, imagine what you could do for the living. Bravus has many wealthy citizens who would pay fortunes to extend their lives, heal their ailments, restore their vigor. The Sea Lord's position gives me influence, but not absolute power. I must maintain support among the great families. And nothing maintains support like offering them something they desperately want. You want me to be your pet healer, I said flatly. No, I want an alliance. You gain the Sea Lord's personal protection. You gain legitimacy, respectability, freedom to pursue your work. In exchange, you provide healing services to those I designate. Discreetly. Selectively. And profitably. Before I could respond, a door to the side of the hall opened. A young man entered, perhaps 20, with the same grey eyes as Farrago but a softer face. Ah, Farrago said. Jon Stark, may I present my son, Coro Antarion. The young man Coro approached and gave a slight bow. An honor, Lord Stark. I've heard remarkable things about you. Nothing too terrible, I hope. Coro smiled. On the contrary. My father tells me you brought a man back from death. That you can heal any wound, cure any illness. And he glanced at his father, who nodded permission to continue, that you somehow enhanced your dire wolf. Made it larger, stronger, more intelligent than nature intended. Rumors tend to exaggerate. Do they? Coro pulled a chair closer and sat, leaning forward with barely contained excitement. Then let me ask directly. Can you modify all living things? Not just heal them, but improve them? Change them at a fundamental level. I studied him, trying to understand where this was going. Why do you ask? Because if you can do to plants what you've done to your wolf. Coro's eyes gleamed. You could revolutionize agriculture. Imagine crops that grow twice as fast, produce 3 times the yield. Grain that thrives in poor soil. Fruits that stay fresh for months. Bravus imports most of its food. We're vulnerable to blockades, bad harvests, political upheaval. But if we could become self-sufficient, strengthen Bravus's independence. I finished. Exactly. Coro looked at his father. Farrago was watching me carefully, gauging my reaction. This was clearly something they'd discussed before summoning me. I thought quickly. What they were proposing was dangerous, revealing more of what I could do, becoming entangled in Bravasi politics. But it was also an opportunity to prepare for long night and even make gold. I'd have freedom to work without constantly looking over my shoulder. And modifying crops was far less conspicuous than my other experiments. I can do it, I said finally. But I'd need to conduct tests first. Experiment with different species, understand their biology. And I'd need access to various seeds, a wide variety to work with. Coro's face lit up. That can be arranged. We have seed merchants from across Essos. Whatever you need. Start small, I interrupted. Basic grains. Vegetables. Things you already grow here. Let me improve those first. Then we can expand to more exotic species. How long would it take? Farrago asked. For initial results? A few weeks, perhaps. To develop fully modified strains ready for planting? Months. I paused. And this stays quiet. We test privately, confirm the results, then scale up slowly. The last thing I need is every merchant prince and magister from here to Karth banging on my door wanting miracles. Agreed, Farrago said immediately. Discretion serves us both. Very well, Jon Stark. I'll have Coro work with you on acquiring seeds and setting up testing grounds. It was better than I'd hoped, honestly. Limited obligation, substantial protection, and resources to advance my work. Acceptable, I said. One more thing. Farrago stood as well. The Faith and the Citadel are moving. If you need assistance dealing with threats, don't hesitate to call on my guards. Better to prevent problems than clean up the aftermath. I'll keep that in mind. Coro accompanied me to the palace entrance, chattering enthusiastically about crop yields and growing seasons and soil composition. I half listened, already planning how I'd approach the problem. Modifying plants was simpler than animals, in some ways less complex biology, easier to control. But making changes that would breed true, that wouldn't revert after a few generations, would require careful manipulation of their genetic structure, but I won't do it. I will make crop who can be planted for only few generations, so they have to constantly buy seeds from me. I'll have seeds delivered to your manor within 3 days, Coro promised as we reached the bronze doors. New chapter is coming soon. Write a review.